Wow, here we are.
Here we are. Paparazzi.
Look at all the, look at all the cameras. So,
All right.
so good
Hello,
afternoon.
hello.
I'm the host. You're the guest.
He's the host. I'm the guest.
You're the talent. All right. So, as you heard, I'm Guy Kawasaki. I am the chief evangelist of Canva, and I'm the host of the Remarkable People podcast. And a couple months ago, I interviewed Meredith for my podcast, and I loved our interview, and I thought she had so much to say about such an important topic that I am so happy and proud and kind of relieved to have someone of your gravitas, shall I say, at South by Southwest.
Well, it's a delight to be here with you, Guy. I was looking forward to revising our interview and talking about what we talk about.
Yeah, all right. So, listen, I believe that the role of the interviewer or the host on one of these things is basically to ask the question and step out of the way. So this should be, 90% you talking, 10% me. This is not about, I'm not Joe Rogan. I'm not trying to get most of the action, okay? So.
Yeah. You want me to talk about my neck?
Okay, so
big,
first question is, seriously, Meredith, has the world changed so much that everybody, even the good guys and good gals, has something to hide?
Look, everyone's always had something to hide, Guy. You all close your bathroom door, right? You talk to your best friend in your moments of crisis the same way you talk to your boss. Do you think out loud when you're working through an idea? Do you tell your new friend you met at a bar the same thing you tell your oncologist? No, we have different relationships. We have a need for intimacy. We have a need for safe spaces to think. We have various relationships that are modulated in different ways with different people, and we have a world that is defined by various power asymmetries in which those in power can often weaponize or misuse intimate information about us, information about our preferences and our patterns and our relationships and our vulnerabilities. So there's no world we have ever had, however many changes we've seen, where people don't care about privacy. However, we have made privacy into this sterile, bleached, technocratic concept that feels like we don't have a stake in it. We don't think about what are the things, the precious things, the democracy, freedom of thought, freedom of expression, intimacy, that privacy actually guarantees as a fundamental condition. So I don't think there's a change here. I think what we're seeing is we're in a much more volatile world. We're in a world that is more surveilled than it's ever been. A handful of organizations have access to staggeringly intimate and granular data about ourselves and our community. And we're realizing that there are real risks to the world that we've created. And there's a need to create real spaces of privacy, which is what Signal tries to do.
So just as a show of hands, how many already use Signal in this audience? Now,
I love you.
Now, can you make the case why everybody who hasn't raised his or her hand should be using Signal today?
Yeah, I can make that case. All right, close your eyes. And I'll be short. I'm not going to go, this isn't a yoga class. Now, every single message you've ever sent in your life is suddenly on a database, and a link just got sent to everyone you know. That's your boss, that's your best friend, that's your dad's best friend, that's the weird guy who comes to your Thanksgiving, that's everyone you know. And they click on that link and they can access that database. And there's a little AI bot that's like appended onto that database so they can quickly summarize everything in that database, search their name, search that one time you told that weird lie because you hadn't had coffee, search that time you talked shit on your best friend because you were in a weird place and you feel really bad about it, but thank God you had Signal disappearing messages, or did you? Search that message to your doctor, search that thing you sent to your colleague that was really mean about your other colleague, search your prescription information, search the time you talked to a union organizer. Search the time you reported corruption at your workplace to a journalist. All of that is on there. How much of your life would survive that? Okay, that's what's on Meta's servers. That's what's on Google's servers. A handful of companies in the world, beholden to whichever government is in power, with that type of information. They can, of course, use it to influence you to buy one thing, athletic greens or whatever it is, fairly innocuous, right? But what else could be done about that? And I think we need to then realize the stakes of having created a world in which that type of centralized surveillance power and power over all of us, that even in the most mundane case, we live a regular life, we have a regular job, we have regular friends, we have joy in the little things, could be used to devastate us. So I don't want to hear anyone talking about not caring about privacy if we really absorb the lesson of what that means. And what I hope that means as well is we can start working in small and big ways to create a world that looks a lot more like Signal and a lot less like this centralized power predicated on surveillance. So anyway.
Can you bring up, or can you give us an example of, if only this person had used Signal, this person wouldn't be in trouble? Or, can you give us a particularly vivid example of how Signal could have prevented a problem?
Well, I'm going to start answering this question with, one of the reasons we have few examples of this is the surveillance data that these companies gather is generally kept behind closed doors. When they do fulfill a law enforcement request, when there is a breach, it's very difficult to trace this, right? We don't have a lot of information. What we do see are collateral consequences. We can't always trace causally back to the source. But there's one example that some people may care about or not. There's a woman right now living in prison because Meta handed over her Facebook DMs to law enforcement in Nebraska post-Dobbs. Those were key sources of evidence used to convict her of accessing and dealing with the repercussions of reproductive health, right? So wherever you sit, that's a very clear example of, a difference maker. This is private communications that were then made public by a company that collected them, that led to, she's maybe cold right now. I don't know. Certainly not working. I don't know if her kids have health insurance. That's a collateral consequence that is existential. But we can zoom out and we can look at something like the Salt Typhoon hack. And how many people here are familiar with the Salt Typhoon hack? Holy shit. This is an indictment of our information ecosystem, not you all, but this was catastrophic. This is a catastrophic hack. And this is, in late 2024, the US government revealed that it looks like Chinese nation-state hackers had gained access to millions and millions of account-level data of people in the US. So this is your name, this is your phone number, this is every SMS you sent, every non-Signal text, every phone call you made, your location data, who you're talking to, when you're talking to them, like the most intimate stuff gained by hackers. Now imagine that in just the DC area. That's when does your asset begin walking into an adversarial intelligence agency? Who's going into your embassy? Who's going to which doctor? Who's going to a reproductive health clinic? Who's meeting with whom? Whose lobbyists are meeting with who else's lobbyists, right? That is incredibly intimate information, including the text, including the phone calls. So that happened. That happened. It may still be happening because it's hard to flush everything out of a network. You don't always know where sort of threat actors are lingering, et cetera, et cetera. But the only remediation for that was offered when the FBI and others disclosed this was consistent use of end-to-end encrypted messaging, like Signal. Now, how did they get in? And we'll talk about backdoors. They got in because they weaponized the interception point, the backdoors, that the telecom companies had implemented in order to allow law enforcement access to those communications. So, when I go around the world saying there's no such thing as a backdoor that only the good guys can get in, either you break encryption for everyone and we have no privacy, or it's robust for everyone and we do, I'm not, this is not hypothetical, right? This is a catastrophic national security breach that the same people who were crying about Snowden should be just as alarmed here, that happened because we didn't heed that lesson.
Well, on that high note,
Yeah. Well, the high note is that we can heed it now, right? Like we have evidence, we have data, we can act on it. Looking at how bad things are isn't negative. It's the first step in salutary change.
before I ask you this question, with the stage behind, if someone could do something helpful for me, which would be to put the image that's you guys are seeing for me to see, because it has live transcription, and I am deaf, and I have a microphone to my cochlear implant, but if I could also read the transcription, it would be very helpful if one of you guys back there stop listening to Pink Floyd for a second and come up here. And, what if I'm sitting out there and I didn't raise my hand that I have signal, but I use WhatsApp, and Meta says that's encrypted. I use messages, that's encrypted. I use Telegraph. Like, am I not already protected? Like, what does Signal do that's better than those?
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is the issue with quick, snappy marketing slogans promulgated by those with huge budgets. Yeah, they do use encryption, but they use a drop of encryption in the lake of their technology, whereas our lake is encryption, right? If you want a metaphor. So WhatsApp licenses our core technology. Signal has built the gold standard for messaging encryption, and that's across the industry. WhatsApp licenses that. But if you picture a layer cake, they're one layer of the cake, and they use our encryption to protect the contents of your messages. So if I text my team, hey, where are we meeting? WhatsApp won't have access to that. What they will have access to is when I texted my team, who my team members are, who's on the group thread that I texted to my team, what my location was, what my profile photo is, my contact list, all the rest of it, right? So that's really intimate information. Oftentimes, that is, as Hayden said, we kill people based on metadata, right? Metadata is really important, and metadata is a fancy little term for all the rest of that information that isn't the content. And so it encrypts a small sliver, but it is not private in the way that Signal is. And Signal, you think of that layer cake, we've gone through and we've made up new recipes to bake every layer in that cake so that we can do it privately, which, let me tell you, is really hard. Because the norm, the assumption, is you want to collect all the data. You pull like standard libraries off the shelf and you use them, you're going to be collecting data. You're going to be transferring data to a remote server. You're going to be doing exactly the things Signal does not do. So we end up spending months and months and months on really simple things because we have to re-architect the fundamental premise of how things work in order to collect as close to no data as possible. So that's a key difference. Now, Telegram is a social media network that collects a huge amount of data and has encryption as a tiny smidge of an add-in on the side for DMs. So there's absolutely no comparison between Signal and Telegram. They are not private. They have a huge amount of data, and they are a social media platform, not a private interpersonal communications platform like Signal. So those are the differences. But of course, you can splash encryption on a billboard, and now I have to be out here explaining the differences.
And what about messages? What about messages, Apple?
What about messages? What about iMessage? I mean, same thing. Apple does better security. They've written something similar. They basically sort of DIY the Signal protocol for what they do. But ultimately, Apple still has, you have a massive corporation that has control over, the on-off switch there. They're not open source. That's another key difference between Signal. I'm not asking you to trust me. I actually would be worried about a world in which sort of, the word or the compelling rhetoric of the executive substitutes for validation, right? You don't have to trust me. Don't trust me. Go look at the code. It's out there. It's open. That's the sort of white blood cells that protect Signal from attack, that every time we make a change, you see it on our repo. You can comb through it, and we actually have a huge number of generous people in the InfoSec and hacker community that spend a lot of time looking at that, and when they see something like, hey, this looks off, or hey, what's this, they email us, and we work with them to make sure if we miss something, we fix it. But we're open source, and that's a key difference between us and the alternatives. And we think that should also be the standard. If we're putting this much trust in these technologies, if they're forming the nervous system of our social and economic institutions, we should be able to validate them.
So to be very specific and tactical, if I am an iPhone user and I'm using messages and I'm using iCloud to do all the syncing with my devices, and I do not turn on encryption for iCloud, it kind of defeats the whole purpose, right? I mean, iCloud is up there with everything I have.
I mean, look, yeah, I don't work for Apple. I work for Signal. Download Signal.
Well, it's because, I've had many conversations about Signal with my friends, and a lot of them tell me, well, I use Apple Messages and I trust Apple. And I said, well, I mean, are you using iCloud to sync? Yeah. And do you have iCloud encrypted? No, I don't even know how to do that. And
now you got to ask, do you live in the UK?
I need new friends.
Well, no. Look, we don't use technology to use technology unless we're a very narrow subsection of tech enthusiast people. We use technology because that's the way we do things around here now in this time. I pick up Signal not because I'm I want to be private now, right? I pick up Signal to be like, hey, where you at? Hey, what are you doing? I want to contact my friends. I want to relate to other people, and that's I don't pick my friends based on whether they care about privacy. I pick my friends on whether they're cool. Whether I like them, whether when I hang out with them, I want to keep hanging out with them or I want to go home, right? And that's the world we want to live in, not one where you have a sort of, it's technological ideology leading, our relationships. And I think we do think a lot about that at Signal, and I think one of the reasons Signal has been able to persist from a virtuosic hacker project over a decade ago to a mass communications network that is, basically the nervous system of secure communications for anyone with anything confidential around the globe, is because at every step, the founding team and the team now thought about the people who didn't care about privacy but needed to communicate, and realized that the high threat individuals, those with a life or death reason to protect confidential information, were not going to be protected if their brother didn't use it, if their friend didn't use it, if their gardener didn't use it, if the person they were talking to at the bank didn't use it. Because communication is a two-way street. And you can't use Signal if your friends don't use Signal. So it has to work. You have to be able to pick it up, and it has to be pleasant and intuitive. And the people, all of us who just want to chill with our friends, need to be able to just send that message without having some sort of overhead that, open up a command line and, produce some sort of long jumbled bits of a key and then put that into another interface and then feel virtuous about it. But who's on the other side, right? Taking human relationships and their primacy seriously is at the heart of what Signal does. And then we wrap that in privacy.
And so what happens, Meredith, if various governments call you up and say, you've got to put a backdoor?
If various governments call me up and say, you got to put a backdoor, I say no.
And you're not going to be in many inauguration pictures if you keep saying that to governments, but okay. So, I mean, let's just change subject for a while. Oh, by the way, they're asking me a question here. So the answer to this question on this monitor is yes, please change it. Somebody already sent in a great question. So it was like, how do you see AI amplifying surveillance risk? So what's the risk of AI in this?
Oh, man. This is a long answer.
We got 39 minutes and
We got 39
seconds.
minutes. Oh, my goodness. Look, AI is... There's a lot of things AI is useful for. I'll back into this question. Finding patterns in large amounts of data has a lot of utility, assuming your data is good. And AI does interesting things, but it is built on the surveillance business model that we have now, right? And I'll give you a little bit of history, and then I want to talk about, the real risks we're seeing from the technologies that are being integrated into our operating systems and into our software right now. You can look, I've been in tech for a long time. I started in 2006, so like ancient for this industry. And so I watched the current AI boom happen, right? This sort of deep learning moment we're still in that started, we can sort of date it more or less to around 2012. At least that's when the investment started coming in for the, for AI, and it started becoming, first we were using machine learning, and then we started using, AI was the sort of marketing term for it. So I'm now seeing myself on the screen, and so I've got to focus over here so I don't, it's like a slight delay. Anyway, focusing hard over here so I don't look at my face while I'm talking. So around 2012, what happened, there was this paper that introduced the AlexNet algorithm, and some folks will be familiar with this, but why I'm spending some time on this is what we saw there was that what was new in AI, and still what is new in AI, the thing that is lofting AI into the stratosphere of sort of, tech optimism and hype, was data and infrastructure. The AlexNet papers showed that old algorithms developed in the late 1980s, these deep learning algorithms that through the 2000s had been considered kind of dead, right? There was a paragraph in a textbook like, we tried it, it didn't work, okay, whatever. But in 2012-ish, it was revealed that if you had a huge amount of data and you had really powerful compute, which was these GPUs that could, 5 GPUs could replace 16,000 CPUs, that you could actually make them do interesting things in terms of objective seeking, right? Optima seeking. And of course, the surveillance advertising industry really perked up their ears. They're like, oh, what do? We're optima seeking algorithms, right? The optima being engagement and ad clicks, right? So can we use deep learning, which we thought was a dead field, to increase engagement, to change our, feeds, right? 2015, you saw YouTube do some changes that got a lot of press. You saw, Meta do some changes. And it's no accident that after this 2012 paper, the 3 authors of the paper immediately hired to Google, right? The person, Jan LeCun, who was sort of the author of those early algorithms, immediately hired to Meta. And those 2 companies, through that first half of the 2010s, had kind of a lead in AI. So what's the point of that entire, interesting little academic lecture? The point being that is really a clear example of what AI is built on when we talk about surveillance dangers. It requires this business model of mass data collection. The more, the better. And we're now seeing that really come home in an obvious way. Reddit's shutting down its APIs. There's sort of this search for data. There's the scraping of libgen. There's a more data, the better. And how do we produce more? How do we create more? How do we sort of whittle away privacy safeguards so that we can get more data? And of course, then there's the infrastructural component, right? The more compute we have, the better, the more energy we need for that compute. This is the NVIDIA share price. This is this sort of, building out data centers. This is the question about where the power sources come from, clean versus coal, et cetera. All of that is because those 2 ingredients are fundamental. And of course, those 2 ingredients are sort of centralized in the hands of the platform companies. So you have an issue of surveillance and centralized power at the heart of the current bigger is better AI paradigm, which, as we got back to around sort of this hyper-surveilled society and the potential collateral consequences, is something I don't think is good. So that's the first sort of historical overview that can give us our grounding for a more precise answer.
Well, that's quite an answer, my God.
Now,
I can tell you that may be the most complete answer to a question in the history of South by Southwest.
oh my God. Well, let's try to beat that right now.
I'm going to give you an easy one. I just want the audience to truly understand that as currently configured, even if you were absolutely forced by whatever powers, you cannot give people the messages because you don't have it, right?
Exactly. The only way to protect data is not to collect it. Come to my house, do what you do, but I don't have it. Provably, we don't have it. And that's how we run, yeah.
And if by some strange miracle, I guess miracles can be bad, but if by some strange reason now you have the data, then it's kind of open season. I mean, there's, but people, let me say this. If by some miracle something happened where you had the data, because you're open source, people would know that something happened and you're no longer as secure, right? I mean,
Yep.
Your feet can be held to the fire.
Yeah. Well, look, yes, if we decided, my board and I decided, it's evil time.
Peace out. Live long and prosper.
And then we were like, okay, we're going to change the code to collect all the data, and then we're going to, I don't know, give it to evil.inc. That would all show up in the code base, right? And when I talk about the sort of immune system, the white blood cells, every single one of those wonderful hypersensitive hackers who are looking at every line of code would immediately spin up the bat signal, right? Everyone would know. Signal is done. It's not happening. And that's as it should be, right? Because we should not rely on sort of individual character as the only arbiter of a guarantee as important as signal's privacy. As much as I would like, I would like to, I try to have a good character, right? We try to hire good people, but that is not a reliable bulwark against something as serious as the type of mass surveillance and the type of harm that would befall, militaries rely on signal, journalists, human rights workers, dissidents, every single government, every single boardroom. Like betraying that trust is a very, very, it would be a profound breach.
So what is your business model? How does Signal, make money to pay for the bills?
Signal's a nonprofit, so we're funded by donations. And look, like nonprofit is a pain in the ass form, by the way, to run an at-scale real-time tech infrastructure. Like it's not, it's kind of like fitting in a dollhouse. In a lot of ways, we're constantly kind of like having to figure out creative ways to do what we have to do as an imperative, as Signal to, continue providing real-time tech that is as reliable as we are and that is sort of up to date on every platform, et cetera, et cetera. But we're a nonprofit, again, because the economic engine of tech is surveillance. You collect data, you create data, you use it to create models that you sell advertisers, you use it to train AI models, or you provide infrastructure and services to those who do. So now imagine we're a for-profit, but we have this, very staunch privacy mission, as we do now, right? That's our objective function. Do it as privately as possible. But then I have some board members, right? And they're like, look, you're not actually meeting your shareholder targets. You're not meeting your investor targets. There's no revenue coming in. How about, let's do Signal for business, and that's not encrypted, right? Well, let's just collect a little bit of metadata so we can do, some, I don't know, silly feature where people, whatever, and then the investors will like it, and you get your Series B or what have you, right? That's the pressure we have to avoid if we want to stay true to our mission and we want to acquit ourselves admirably, given the responsibility we have to the people who rely on us. So we cannot, in terms of our mission, risk that kind of pressure in an ecosystem where profit is created via practices that are diametrically opposed to what we stand for.
But a nonprofit is not necessarily non-revenue. Like, could you charge $10 a month to use Signal?
Well, look, we're
'Cause
exploring.
I would pay that.
No, yeah, right. We could charge $10 a month to use Signal, and we're exploring like freemium features and other things. But again, let's get back to like, no one uses Signal if their friends don't use Signal. So if only paying customers are able to use Signal, but their friends don't care as much, their contact doesn't care as much, that guy you met on Hinge doesn't care as much, you're not going to use Signal. If you're poor, you're real poor, like $10 is a lot of money for a lot of people. You can't use Signal, right? So when we think about communication networks, when we think about the network effect, when we think about encryption, which always has to be a two-way street, it always has to be networked, we can't gatekeep like that and do what we do.
But on the other hand, if you, God forbid, if donations ever dry up, we want Signal to survive. I would rather pay $10 a month or $5 or whatever than, it's like Wikipedia. I want Wikipedia to survive. I don't want it to die. I'd rather pay for it.
If anyone here understood me as advocating for Signal not to survive, please raise your hand. Of course, like Signal needs to thrive and survive, and absolutely pay for it, right? We do have a robust donor base. We're looking at, other options for gathering donations. We think, it would be a $1.5 billion endowment would be something that would kick off enough to fund Signal year over year. It's about $50 million a year to sustain Signal, and that's very, very cheap for tech, for those of you not from the industry. And, we're looking at a landscape that's a little bit perverse, frankly, where you have, let's give an example, right? You have some defense tech startup is white labeling an AWS API and calling it innovation, and they're getting billion-dollar valuations, and Signal's, fundraising, even though it's, probably one of the most vital technologies used by every military in the world, right? So, there is something deeply, deeply broken about the economic paradigm, about the incentives in tech. And for now, what we're doing is everything we can to protect what Signal is, because if Signal, if we shut down Signal today, we couldn't rebuild it, right? You can't rebuild a network effect in a saturated market. You can't rebuild the gold standard reputation that has been developed day by day over a decade by people inspecting our code, looking at our cryptographic systems, looking at what we do, improving it. There's an ecosystem built around it that you can't just snap your fingers and do. And that's one of the lessons around communication networks, right? The network effect is really powerful. So we have to, I feel like sometimes like a dragon outside a cave, just like protecting this jewel that we have, because we have it. We have to sustain it. And yeah, I would love a different economic model, right? I would love for that to be reversed, where you can't just, fundraise on some, white labeling and call yourself an entrepreneur.
Oh, no.
But we are where we are.
Meredith, I want to go on the record that I would gladly pay every month to use Signal.
You can pay. Go settings, donate to Signal.
Well,
there you go.
And I would pay even more and donate even more so that poor people who cannot afford to pay can still use it for free.
There's a text field where you can enter your own amount.
How many?
We're never going to means test, so we don't know.
Can I put in 50 million?
On the record, Guy can put in 50 million.
So, sort of related to this question, so what happens if some tech bro who's worth $500 billion calls you up and says, I want to buy Signal? What happens in that conversation?
Signal's not for sale, but we would love if someone's interested. Look, we're a nonprofit, so if they wanted to buy Signal, we would, as per the tax code we're incorporated under, be forced to reinvest however much that money is in mission-aligned causes. Like, I wouldn't get rich, My board wouldn't get rich. My executives wouldn't get rich. There's no, again, this is part of the prophylactic that keeps us mission focused, not tempted by the, the worldly things of the tech riches.
But didn't OpenAI start as a nonprofit?
OpenAI did start as a nonprofit. But OpenAI misunderstood the political economy that it was working in. It's a nonprofit, but that doesn't mean Azure servers needed to train their massive, massive models that can cost like $1 billion a training run are not expensive. So ultimately, they're a nonprofit that needed to make the choice of either paying retail for the compute they need or being pulled into the gravitational orbit of one of the hyperscalers. So it's the AI paradigm that I described before, which is reliant on mass data, reliant on mass compute, very, very expensive resources, that is kind of the issue. And I think OpenAI kind of maybe didn't clock the sort of political economy they were playing in. So you can incorporate any way you want. But for Signal, this is a prophylactic against certain incentives. In the AI industry, those incentives are constitutive of what we're talking about right now when we talk about AI, which is requiring massively expensive compute, huge amounts of data that are generally pooled in the hands of these companies, and that doesn't quite matter what your tax status is in that case. So they were going to get pulled in. You have like Mistral in France, another sort of open source AI, doing really, really cool things in AI. But what's their path to market? Their path to market is still through the hyperscalers, right? Because that's where the AI concentration of power is. That's where the resources are.
Okay, we took the billionaires off the table.
They can still donate. Like, for real. Noblesse oblige.
Do we have any billionaires in this audience? So we need 50 million right now, right? I don't see anybody standing.
Same amount of people who'd heard of Salt Typhoon.
Is there absolutely any catch or downside to using Signal?
Why? No. None. Yeah. I don't think there is. It's free. It's classy. We're not shoving weird AI shit into it,
Listen, I can tell you as a user of Signal, one of the things that really bugs me about Apple's messages is that I have an iPad, I have a phone, I have 2 iMacs and a MacBook Pro, and my messages is never, ever synced. I got message on some, I got message on other. Sometimes it says your picture didn't send, sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. When it says it didn't, my computers are never in sync, and I can tell you I run Signal on every computer, and it is perfectly in sync all the time.
You heard it here.
If you weren't a not-for-profit, I would be a Signal evangelist for you.
I mean, you can be a Signal evangelist for us now, Guy. We're pretty casual. Just start.
So I gotta pay for my Signal. I gotta donate money, and I gotta evangelize it.
Yes, you gotta.
I have a firm grasp of the obvious here. So you in your checkered past, you work for Google and Meta.
I never worked for Meta.
I thought you worked for Facebook.
Literally never.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, there goes that question.
So that's where the checker's coming in.
Well, I mean, but still, I can ask you this question because you're in a position to judge. But with Google, I mean, we've come a long way from do no harm. I mean, what happens to a company like that starts off with doing no harm, and it doesn't seem to be executing on doing no harm anymore?
Well, I mean, look, doing no harm to your shareholders, maybe.
I don't think that's how it was meant. But.
No, it wasn't meant that way, but ultimately, we're talking about objective functions, optimus seeking, right? If the primary goal that has to be met before all others is meeting revenue and growth targets, it's probably hard to resist a good revenue and growth target, right? Like, and I'm not, this isn't saying like profit is evil. Like, no, I think these companies and the type of power they wield and how they're constituted, are kind of in charge of social good, have become the engines of our institutions, have, providing core infrastructures that are ultimately being governed by incentives that aren't always allied with the social good.
So you would say that a for-profit company's responsibility is to the shareholders. I mean, in that sense, Mark Zuckerberg, Tim Cook, their responsibility is to the shareholders. It's not to the employees. It's not to the customers. It's not to society. They got to do whatever it takes for the shareholders.
I would say that is the primary concern. It's not that employees don't need to be happy. It's not that you don't need to build products that work. It's that in a sort of stack rank, that's the first thing that needs to be solved before all the rest gets solved. And I mean, I'm not saying anything like controversial, right? Like you see, it says it on the tin, right? Like this is the, and if the shareholders weren't happy, then, Sundar would be out. That's just how it works.
Meredith, I've been in Silicon Valley for about 40 years, starting in the mid-'80s, 1980s, not 1880s. And I gotta tell you, man, my recollection, and even in like recent communication with Steve Wozniak, man, we were all about making the world a better place. We make the world a better place, and if you make the world a better place, we believe we would also make a lot of money. But we didn't, I don't think the primary thing was to become trillionaires. And I just don't understand it. I'm so it's like, tell me there's no Santa Claus and, Silicon Valley isn't out to make the world a better place.
This gets in, like, I don't think anyone wants to be a bad person. Like, I don't, like, there isn't some, like, evil class of people who are like, you know what? I want to make the world worse. But I do think there, ultimately you're sitting there with a bunch of McKinsey consultants and you're trying to figure out how to meet your targets, and you don't want that one guy on your board to be mad at you, and like you got kids at home and they got school applications or whatever it is, and like the summer house has a leak. You just got to get it done, right? And what are you going to do? You're going to be like, I think we need to rethink this AI thing. Right? You'll be kicked off the board, right? Like there's a ecosystem within which this works, where most of these choices are common sense, where there is no, it's kind of a perfect bureaucracy, if we want to go into that, management theory. So I think, I don't think this is about evil people. I think this is about, again, really perverse market incentives, a very perverse economic engine that sort of relies on certain practices that are now normative, and the fact that, that is constituting a significant amount of power in the hands of institutions whose, again, objective function is like, make sure that one guy on the board isn't angry, and make sure we, are ticking up in this market. Make sure we're ticking up versus our competitors in terms of revenue and growth, not necessarily in terms of, openness, verifiability, social benefits, moving slowly, fixing things.
Okay. There's some really great questions there, right? So let's take this first one. Signal still relies on centralized infrastructure. Do you see a viable path towards decentralization while maintaining ease of use? Is it centralized?
Well, Jack, thank you for this question. Well, we rely on cloud services, like almost every, at scale startup or tech concern. And I think, we do need to index on this term decentralized, right? What are we actually talking about decentralizing? Because there are some really, you have some very interesting protocols and technologies that allow people to sort of, in the spirit of the early internet, kind of spin up a server and create an instance of something that, interacts with other people who've created an instance of something. And so it's not one organization as Signal kind of, governing all of that, signing the contracts with AWS, signing the contracts with, Google Cloud, Cloudflare, et cetera. That's great. There are some real issues with that, however. I think in the sort of decentralized paradigm now, we talk about sort of the technology being decentralizing, the protocol itself, but we still have something like the Winklevoss twins can own most of the Bitcoin mining rigs because they have most of the money, even though that's a decentralized protocol. So it's not necessarily decentralizing power or control. It's a decentralized protocol. And in the case of Signal, there's a real issue with sort of spreading out responsibility randomly to a bunch of people who spin up a Signal node. One of those, just very practically, is if there is a security issue in Signal and we need to push a patch very rapidly to fix Signal, we can't have the guy running the servers in Greece be on vacation. We have to be able to do that. And so it can actually be antithetical to the type of privacy and security guarantee that we make, which is not an endorsement of the centralization of tech, right? It's a recognition that in order to do what we do in the environment where almost nobody runs their own servers, where we've all moved onto the cloud, where that's, to make a call from Bangkok to Bermuda, you have to have edge presence in both, and that's very expensive. We don't have hundreds of millions of dollars to create parallel infrastructure. That's a huge problem that does need to be solved, but we're very cautious that sort of sprinkling a novel decentralized protocol on top of that would allow us to achieve the goals that Signal needs to achieve to continue.
Okay. Here's another question, and I think what this person is getting at is that in a quantum world or quantum computing, it's so powerful. Can quantum computing break your encryption?
So Signal has used one of the NIST algorithms. We were the first messaging app to quantum proof our protocol against harvest now, read later attacks, which are basically if someone collected all the encrypted data, it's total nonsense to them now, but in a future with a sufficiently powerful quantum computer, which we anticipate will happen sometime, they could then break that encryption. So we are quantum proof there. We were the first to do that. We are working on answering some fundamental as yet unanswered questions in the field of cryptography that will allow us to quantum proof the protocol for a future in which we're facing a contemporaneous quantum computer of sufficient strength to break the encryption in real time. That future is not here, but we're also preparing for that. So,
all right.
There you go.
Next question. I've wondered about this myself. So the Dutch are signing up for Signal faster than anybody.
Yes. Go Netherlands. I have no idea why. The question is why? Like, look, I'm Signal. I have no idea why. That's my whole thing.
Okay. Another good question. Do you want to answer? Well, there's
this helps Guy hear me.
Yeah.
It's an assistive device.
If any of you are hearing impaired, I'll give you a little ad here. So this is a microphone that transmits digitally her audio to my cochlear implant, or it could digitally transmit it to hearing aids, and it's a beautiful thing. So a cochlear implant takes you from being deaf to having really lousy hearing. And then this thing takes you from having really lousy hearing to having pretty good hearing.
And I want to know their data policy.
I don't think it's encrypted, though.
I mean, is this a local mesh? What are we doing here? I don't know. We got to see. Be careful.
We'll ask big balls.
Oh,
yeah. We got 10 minutes. Go.
Yeah.
Go, Meredith, go.
So I just requested the question, but so I got into some of the AI and surveillance issues that we face with the sort of big longue durée history answer that I gave. But I do want to get into some of the more immediate issues I think we're facing right now. And I'll do another like raise hands. Like, how many people knows what an agent is? And I'm keeping my hand down here, by the way.
Did you say agent?
An
or
agent,
Asian?
like agent.
Okay, because I'm an Asian.
And yeah, well, I mean, I think like insofar as race is also socially constructed, we can get into that as well. But an agent, agentic AI, the thing that is the new buzzword that everything that used to be an assistant now is. I think there's a real danger that we're facing, and Signal is clocking this pretty closely, of the introduction of this sort of notion of agentic AI into our devices and lives, in part because what we're doing is giving so much control to these systems that are gonna need access to data. So if you read the kind of, you read the marketing on this, the value add is something like, can look up a concert, book a ticket, schedule it in your calendar, and message all your friends that it's booked, right? And so we can just put our brain in a jar because the thing is doing that and we don't have to touch it, right? And so what would it need to do that? Well, it would need access to our browser, an ability to drive that. It would need our credit card information to pay for the tickets. It would need access to our calendar, everything we're doing, everyone we're meeting. It would need access to Signal to open and send that message to our friends. And it would need to be able to drive that across our entire system with something that looks like root permission. Accessing every single one of those databases, probably in the clear, because there's no model to do that encrypted. And if we're talking about a sufficiently powerful model, AI model that's powering that, there's no way that's happening on device, even though on device isn't a prophylactic, isn't going to really solve a lot of those issues. That's almost certainly being sent to a cloud server where it's being processed and sent back. So there's a profound issue with security and privacy that is haunting this sort of hype around agents, and that is ultimately threatening to break the blood-brain barrier between the application layer and the OS layer by conjoining all of these separate services, muddying their data, and doing things like undermining the privacy of your Signal messages because, hey, the agent's got to get in, the agent's got to text your friends, the agent's got to pull the data out of your text and got to summarize that so that, again, your brain can sit in a jar and you're not doing any of that yourself. You're doing something else. So I think we need to be really careful. You know, when I think about the immediate concerns, not simply the history of AI and the fact that it's, you know, predicated on this larger surveillance model, there's a real issue right now of the undermining that AI systems are poised to do in these privacy and security guarantees in the name of this sort of, you know, magic genie bot that's going to take care of the exigencies of life. So that's what I wanted to say.
You know, Meredith, you should feel free to talk and come out of your shell and really express your feeling. I wish you would stop holding yourself back.
It's a process, Guy. It's a process.
Yeah. We have a few more good questions here. Well, okay, so here's a hypothetical. Go for it.
So can you all see the questions, or do we need, no. So the question is, not collecting data will mean no AI enablement, which in turn will impede progress and innovation. I mean, AI is also a massive booster. Share your view, please.
You asked for it. You're going to get it now.
Well, no, look, I mean, one, yes, that's true. That is true. I don't think it means impeding progress and innovation, and I do want to pick that apart because I think conflating whatever the newest product, whatever the newest, you know, offer from a tech company is with progress and innovation is part of how we got here, right? Like, there is nothing natural about the current AI ecosystem. There's nothing natural about the amount of surveillance data in the hands of a few companies. There's nothing natural about the way GPUs look, right? They might be interesting, they might do cool things, but I think Signal proves that there's a totally different way to do things if you want to, and that we can't conflate like the largest AI model with the most advanced, with the state of the tech industry now, with the most innovative. So I would say no, we're not impeding progress in innovation, progress in privacy, progress in consistency, progress in providing something that actually protects rights and isn't, breaking this blood-brain barrier, allowing bots with root access to scavenge across our operating systems and system calls. I think that is, something we should celebrate. And frankly, I don't think a lot of the AI that's being integrated to these products is welcome or necessary or useful. What I see is company-wide OKRs saying AI, every product team needs an AI goal. And then the product manager, the directors are like, okay, well, figure out where to put AI. And then they're like, okay, well, I guess we can have like a weird AI search function that's kind of confusing. It's like Clippy, but verbose. And then they launch it, and they're like, this is an agent. And you're like, why won't they let me dismiss it? It says accept or do later. Okay, there's a weird dark pattern here. Okay, well, now it's summarizing this stuff, but it's kind of wrong, and I don't know exactly how to turn it off, but I'm going to get used to it and just ignore it, right? So no, we're not going to do that because, one, we only want to put features in that people actually want, that serve their needs, and two, to get back to the premise of the question, we're not going to collect that data. We're not going to subject your data to training. We're not going to subject an AI model based on your data to data exfiltration attacks and the other vulnerabilities that are constitutive of these systems. And we do think that's innovative, actually.
Do you? Meredith, I have to say, to my recollection, and I've done, oh my God, I must have done 10 of these. I don't think there's been more applause in any session of any South by Southwest.
Hell yeah.
I tell you what, like, we have 2 minutes and 56 seconds, and I just want you to explain, just tell people why they gotta get on Signal. This is your moment. Just get on Signal.
Do you want to be cool? Do you want to be loved by the people around you? Do you want to live in a world with rights protecting tech? Do you want your DMs to show up in Discovery? Do you want a data breach to compromise that weird conversation you had? Do you want, a centralized company that is clearly willing to swing in the political winds to make a decision about your data 10 years from now when we have a different regime and a different world, but they still have your data? I almost feel like I don't have to make this pitch because it's so obvious, but then that's the world I live in. So.
As a self-appointed, newly recruited evangelist for Signal, I will tell you something. Like, first of all, you heard why I like Signal more than messages, is because everything is synced. I also like Signal more than messages because you have nothing that anybody can get, right? And vis-a-vis WhatsApp, what drives me crazy about WhatsApp is that it's helping Meta, which is a big problem in my mind. But also with WhatsApp, they only let you use it on 4 or 5 platforms, right? And I got more platforms than WhatsApp will let me sign in. So every time I go to the 5th one, it says you got to sign out from another one to put one in, because Mark Zuckerberg only has 4 computers in his house, so you cannot have any more. I don't understand that. And I will tell you, I am a true Signal believer. I love what you're doing, and I think every one of you should go right now and download Signal and get on Signal for your benefit. Yeah. All righty, I think that.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Guy. Thank you all. It's great to be here.
All righty, thank you.